Welcome to Across the Ring. My name is William Mayhem Michaels.
This is the scientist, Carl Schupfer, and today we are here with Charles Cassus. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. How are you two? I'm excited for this.
We're doing great, man. Before we get started, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
I am Charles R3 Cassus. I've been doing this for a little over a decade, Arizona-based. I do some coaching, graphic designing, anything that has to do with wrestling I've been a part of or am still a part of currently.
All right, man. So you said that you've been doing this for a little over a decade, which means I'm pretty sure you and I graduated right around the same time. So what made you kind of decide to enter the business?
Man, it starts off with the just stereotypical, I grew up watching it. It was my escape, right? I love talking about it, but I feel like that's 90% of people's answers. But that was like an escape as a kid. And when I was 18, actually, right out of high school, because I graduated in California, I was supposed to start a school in Studio City, and a bunch of shit happened and ended up moving to Arizona. So halted everything for a very long time. And obviously a lot of backyard stuff happens. So there was some stuff in there. That's kind of how I met Alex Salyers. So we went through that whole backyard phase and all that. And there was this indie promotion back in the day that there was a deal where we used Alex's ring and they would use some of the guys that we were doing this backyard thing with. That was a horrible experience. And it was awful. It got to a point where in my mind, I was like, if this is what indie wrestling is, and I don't want to do it at all. And I kind of took myself away from it. And I was big into vlogging and YouTube stuff. So I kind of dabbled in trying to make YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
But through that process, I ended up finding a couple of people that I made good connections with. And they were wrestling for a place called EXW at the time. And I started doing graphics and videos for them. And so that's kind of how I got involved a little bit. And that place opened up a school in Scottsdale. They had their own building. And this was 2013. And I started doing their recording and their graphics. And eventually I showed actual interest in training when they started their school, which was called the New Power Plant. So it was Johnny Stamboli and the promoter Brian Barnett were there. So you can tell why the Power Plant name was a part of our shtick. And yeah, one day they're like, if you want to do this, give it a shot. My tuition was pretty much paid by the work I did. So all the graphics and all the video stuff. So that was a good deal in that sense. And yeah, it's something I always wanted to do. I always tell people Hulk Hogan is the reason I started watching wrestling, why I fell in love with it. And The Undertaker is the reason why I wanted to become a wrestler. And it could have just been with age. I got older, Taker debuted when I was 6 as The Undertaker. So that's how old I am. But yeah, it was just a bunch of series of events. But even through all the crap, there was some good in between, and it led me to finally signing up for the school. And yeah, I was 28 when I started professionally training.
So 28 is a little older. We've had people on that are as young as 15, 16, starting their training. For you, how did you get over some of the doubts or intimidation that came from training a little older than some of your peers?
It was a hell of a process, because even from a personal standpoint, I was very, very shy, very in my shell, non-confrontational. So it was just that on top of being the big guy of the group and having zero confidence pretty much. And my trainer didn't, I think in the end, kind of helped me bring out of my shell, but the process was very, very tough. It was one of those I can see your insecurity, so I'm gonna fucking take jabs at them. But our class made it better. The people in the class, there were times where we didn't get along, but I think for the most part, everyone was pretty accepting. There was no oh, this old guy, Charles, over here trying to wrestle. And there was really none of that. So I think that helped, that our class had such a bond in a sense. And yeah, ultimately, with the trainer, the way his method at the time worked, and it got me out of the shell. And at the time, it sounds weird to say, but at the time I was working retail, and retail helped with letting me express myself and letting me stand up for myself, because you had to do that in certain situations of the working world. So I think all these little things kind of just helped. And wrestling ultimately is the thing that opened me up and gave me confidence. And it was just kind of the more I started going to training and the better I was doing, and realizing that I was pretty good at it, I think gave me the confidence, oh man, I'm sticking around. And even on days where I didn't want to, or I went home thinking this wasn't for me, I think just the willingness to want to go back was like a sign that this was like something I really wanted to do. So I'm like, I'm just gonna fucking do it. I have to. And if I don't, I'm gonna keep doing it till the wheels fall off. And that's kind of it.
I totally get how where retail would help you out, because as we talked the other day at the signing, I
Yeah.
worked at Converse, and that's what really broke me out of my shell, kind of playing off of that. So how long was you training with like EXW before you finally had your first match in the Indies?
So, so like through that whole like other indie promotion that we don't talk about in the backyard stuff, I had essentially learned how to like run ropes and take a basic bump and stuff like that. So when I started training, EXW had moved to the building and it had changed over to FSW Arizona is what it was.
Mhm.
And then whatever drama happened there, it turned into Championship Wrestling from Arizona. So it like went through some name changes. So when I was training, the shows we were doing were presented by Championship Wrestling from Arizona, but they were like non-televised. It was like an indie show version of it, I guess.
Mhm.
And yeah, I started training. I had gallbladder surgery a couple of months before, which was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. So I took my gallbladder out. And then like 2 months later, my dumbass decided to start bumping and doing all that. And yeah, I remember the first time, because when you first started, you get bumped like hell. And not everybody could pick me up for slams. So I had to give myself my own bumps. But I had to do even more of them because that was my punishment for being too big for people to pick up on their own, right? A lot of rope running, stuff like that. I know my first day I was essentially put on a training routine to quit because my trainer had this tendency to whisper really loud so you can hear the things he's saying about you.
Mhm.
And as I was running ropes, he told one of the other guys, he's like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna make this guy quit like the other one." But it was whispering, so I heard it obviously. And
Right, right.
that was one of those things where I'm like, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen." So I took a shitload of bumps that night,
You're like,
but
hell no. That's not
so
gonna.
many. But I think I want to say like on 3 or 4 months. After 3 or 4 months, I had my first match. So thankfully, like the bumping and running ropes and basic drills that I had done before I started that helped me advance fairly quickly.
So you mentioned some of your coaches and people that kind of helped get you trained being in a school, but either within the school or even beyond that throughout your career, who are some people that you would look at and be like, those were some of my role models, and what made you look up to them?
Oh man, there's a lot. I'm grateful that I have like plenty and for different reasons. I am my initial trainer at his best. I mean, his like mind for psychology is fantastic. And one of his best traits, which I applied when I took over as head trainer, like later on in the future, is he took a group of people and it wasn't like making robots. It wasn't like I need to make a bunch of me's to do this. He pulled out like the best out of you and made like the best you possible, like in your version, however you are as a wrestler. And I mean, you take our whole class and you put us in like a circle, like none of us are the same or even similar, I think, in some aspects. Only was like one person kind of pulled that out of all of us. So like I'm definitely thankful for like the wrestling part, the psychology part. It's like a big thanks definitely goes to Navajo Warrior. That guy took me under his wing. I met him 7 months, about half a year after I started, first time wrestling. And yeah, I mean, I guess he took a liking to me, but he's one of those people that you go into a locker room and he's respected and he's a veteran. He's not one of those dudes that has to walk around and tell you how long he's been wrestling for. Like you just see him, you see how he talks, the interactions, and you can just tell. Like this dude has done shit. And I credit him for how to be professional, how to behave, work ethic, pretty much everything that is not in the wrestling ring that is just as much, if not more important than the in-ring stuff. And I credit him for it. All opportunities, you know what I mean? Whether it was doing extra work or getting connected to people and stuff like that, like it's all him. And I mean, obviously, like I put in the work, so it's like he's not gonna just give opportunities to randos. But still, like I never thought I would have done some of the things if it weren't for him. And just being able to have like a reputation with promoters and having promoters hit me up for like new talent or being that kind of resource is because of him. Like I know how to conduct myself and be professional because of him. And there's been when you're in locker rooms and you get lucky enough to see veterans and they give you the time of day, even if it's 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever, like that is valuable. And you just take what you can and apply it to yourself. And like I've shared locker rooms with like Simbodes and Doms, Gallows, all those guys, and even like guys I trained with who just had a mind. I mean, like Graves' like storytelling mind for wrestling is nuts. And we trained together. You know, he was I think maybe like a year before I started, but just his mind process is great. So like when it just clicks or someone explains something to you in such a way that it just like makes sense to you, it's super valuable. So like there's so many people, but I mean like the ones I just named, but as far as like the ultimate person that I would think would be a Navajo warrior.
Heck yeah. And I got to meet Navajo Warrior at the King of Arizona. Very respectable guy, very nice guy.
Also, Morgan, his wife, they're
Yeah.
both combo. I always call them a compliment sandwich because Navajo will be like, this is what you got to work on, right? And Michelle will also tell you what you got to work on, but she's also very good at being like, you're doing really good at this, or this is great, and just encouraging, you know. But that team is fantastic. They're pretty much just my wrestling parents.
Absolutely. And so to kind of get pulled into your name, you know, you mentioned in the beginning of the interview, it's Charles Cassus R3, which your R3 is standing for ruthless, relentless, and resilient. What inspired that for you?
Shit, dude. So this is like you might remember, but way back in the day, there were. I don't know if you ever heard of e-wrestling. So
Yeah.
it's like pretty much like you type out promos and that's how your match. So
Yes.
I got into
Yes.
that stuff.
Yeah.
I got into that stuff, and like in the townhouses I lived in back in California, me and my buddies were doing like one of our friends' parents was a manager for the townhouse place, so he would take the keys and we would go into the townhouses that weren't being rented, and we like pretty much fucked them up and like wrestle and throw each other on fucking closet doors and all that. And one of them was like big into like marine life and army and stuff like that. And one day we were sitting outside and we were giving each other wrestling names, and he's like, you're like a recon. He's like, so I think we're gonna call you recon. It's just when you're wrestling and doing stuff, you just have this look in your face. So I'm like, all right, I don't know what the fuck that is, but we'll do it. And then when EFED started back, and in that time it was cool to like turn the letters into numbers and do whatever. So I was spelling recon like R3K0N was like the way I would spell it for these like promos, online promos. And people, it just kind of by accident, like people would start referring me as R3, I guess, to cut off the K0N thing. And the more I got into that stuff, I'm like, oh, I need a catchphrase. I need like a nickname or whatever. I'm like, what do I do? And I was talking to one of my friends and they're like, do something with like the R3. And so I went to like the dictionary and found like 3 words to start with R that would fit like a wrestling character. And that just became the shtick. And then when I started training, I remember we were at a lucha show and I went up to LT and I was like, hey, I think I have a name. And he's like, what is it? I was like, what about R3? And it like stops for like 10 seconds. He's like looking at the match that's going on. And then he's like, well, it's not the worst thing I've ever heard. So I was like, all right, that's what we're going with. I'm using that name. So I pretty much took this whole like backyard teenager name and like applied it to wrestling now, which I never thought would have been a thing. And as far as Cassus goes, when I opened up a Facebook, I needed an actual last name. So I was like, I need a last name for this like R3 character. And Graves gave me the idea for Cassus. It was like some big like kingpin boss guy from some video game. I don't remember what video game, but like it was from some video game. He's like, you should look at this guy. He's like King Cassus or some shit. So I looked it up and I was like, it sounds cool. So I'm like, Cassus was pretty much just like the Facebook name because I needed a placeholder there. Yeah. I mean, fast forward, I was feuding with Peter Avalon, and we were heading into a super serious match that the pandemic ruined. And during this match, that was when my name transition was going to happen. It's like, we're going to be serious now. We're going to dropping the nicknames. We're dropping the monikers. So from now on, it's Charles Cassus, not R3. So even with the pandemic happening, I was like, when I come back, I'm just going to go by the name. I still get the R3 stuff, but like, it's not, that's where Charles Cassus became more of the little marquee thing pretty much.
Right. Yeah. The R3 is now more secondary. Like it's still a party, but it's not what you want to be like focused on. That makes sense. When I heard it, as somebody that's, a little bit outside, since I'm up here in Milwaukee instead of part of the scene down by you guys, I hear R3 and I see the words and I think John Cena. And so for you, was there any part of that you kind of pulled into, like similar, like thought process or vibes with some of the stuff around those names and like using it as like your, like your source of like pride?
Yeah, I mean, there was like the more I learned about wrestling, the more I realized like how important names and like nicknames can be. And one of the things I realized is because my LT would tell me, he's like, you got to remember, you're using R3, you're pretty much giving yourself three nicknames. So I'm like, you have to go in the ring and essentially show that if you're gonna be ruthless, relentless, and resilient, and not just one of them, like you got to go in there and kind of show that you're all
Mm-hmm.
three and not just one thing. And I mean, just as wrestling kind of changed up, it went from nicknames to like real names. So it was one of those things where you just kind of transition, you kind of adjust and adapt to stuff like that. So that's kind of like what I tell like new guys now is don't come in giving yourself all these random nicknames. Like try to like have this natural thing, because most of the most popular nicknames, like some people get lucky, right? Like R3 became a shtick, and even when I try to drop it, people still call me that. So I got lucky, but there's some people that call themselves like the monster from hell or something, and then they come out wearing like fucking Party City gear, and they're like nobody believes that you're the monster from hell,
Yeah.
and it just kind of like cuts you down, and I think it hurts you more than anything. So it's like just the best nicknames have come from other people, ring announcers for like television. They call someone something, and the wrestler likes it. So that's kind of how that sticks to you.
Right. Or hates it and you get stuck with it, right? Like it can
Yeah,
go
and
the
it's
other
just
way, it's like, well, that's what they call me now, so I guess I got to make that work.
oh yeah. I mean, dude, at one point, R3 is gonna kill you was like a big chant for a lot of the shows when I first started AWF, and I didn't like it because at the time Samoa Joe was the guy for that. Like he was known for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to be like this secondary ripoff of that, but it
Right.
wasn't my thing. I was like, but I'm getting the crowd reaction. They're getting involved, so I'm like, I'm just gonna sit here and acknowledge it. And yeah, I mean, it's like when you let them make them realize that it's their choice and they're the ones that made it up, they're going to be more inclined to want to do it. Head collector was another nickname that I did not come up with, but I was like, fans dig it, fans love it. They're going to buy the merch if I put it on a shirt. So like, let's go with it.
Yeah, you got to find that way to make money, right?
Yes.
So I will tell you, traveling around the Arizona independent wrestling scene, your name is brought up quite often. I think more often than not, to be honest. I don't think I've been to any shows where I didn't hear of Charles Cassus or R3 or whether it's during the show or one of the boys or someone's always bringing you up, and it's always been really good feedback, which is why it's always been a big push for me to get you on the show. With that in mind, who are some of the young talents that you would bring up or that you think has a bright future?
None of them. They all suck. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot. I mean, I'm at a point in like my wrestling journey or career, whatever you want to call it, where I get more joy out of like helping new people out or hearing new people get complimented that I've had anything to do with. So like when I took over as head trainer, like my core group of like my 5, 6 kids, like anytime someone would come to me and tell me how good they did, like that meant more to me than someone telling me how good I did. So it's just like, and just being able to experience different people. To me, the biggest thing is when I compliment or look at someone, it's like how much work they're doing, even if
Mm-hmm.
they're at like a baby step point or they're like still learning. Like I can tell the difference with that, but I can also see if you're properly putting in work for it. And I will never lie to like new people if they ask. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of missing a little bit is that honesty part. Cause I know it sucks. If you like someone, it does suck to be like, you know what, you're not that good right now.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to. It just that doesn't do anybody any favors to boost their egos unfairly, because then they go off, and then when they venture off on their own without you, they're gonna get like a harsh reality check, and it's gonna be so detrimental. But for me, I'm like, I love working. I mean, literally, the last show I did was with against Ocean Avery, and he's fairly new, and I worked him in a tag match, I think like 2 years before, and just feeling the difference and talking to him and the passion and the dedication he has, and like I see his stuff online, like how often he goes to training and going to the gym and stuff like that's the stuff that to me matters, because it shows that you are dedicated and you're wanting to do this. Because wrestling isn't just 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes in the ring. It's literally like a lifestyle thing. It's
Right.
social media, it's the gym, it's how you conduct yourself, it's
Right.
properly behaving, being professional. So like those are the people that I want to see succeed and the people I put over. So like Ocean Avery is definitely one of them. He has a presence, good attitude, pleasure to work with, listens, and you can see it. And me personally wrestling, feel like the improvements there. Vegas was fun because you get to work a bunch of people there. It's one of those things to where like you love working people that are better than you so you can learn, but then you reach a point where it's cool to have a phase where you're working new kids to kind of feel all that out. And just seeing people in general, like their success, like I remember seeing Jordan Cruz wrestle for the first time at an AWF show years ago, and just to see where he's at now is fucking insane. And he deserves every bit of it because he works his ass off. I mean, my kids, Bryce, Damian, Chewy's getting his feet wet now. Akira, who's in Chicago, Cole, who's in Washington.
Akira, that's like the guy that does deathmatch stuff, right?
No, it's a different one.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, I was like, I know a guy that by that name that comes in my neck of the woods. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, no, he's based out of Chicago and doing his thing there. But like,
Okay.
this is what like I like with Bryce. He recently moved to North Carolina a few months ago, and whenever I get messages from people, whether it's promoters or wrestlers or whoever, and they put him over and said how good he's doing, that makes me proud because like, okay, I did my job in teaching him properly, and he's taking it and applying it. Same thing with Damien Desire. Like, I take pride in just hearing how good they are and how pleasant they are in the locker room, and they're receptive to feedback. I've always told them, take feedback from whoever, and you just take whatever applies to you and do it. Yeah, there's a lot of people. Chubby and Ricky. I mean, Bryce, Chubby, and Ricky all debuted the same weekend, and I accidentally did that show. So yeah, it was one of those things where I showed up to training, and because I showed up, they're like, "Hey, do you want to do the show?" And I agreed to it. So, but it ended up being like the start of a lot of cool things. We had Chubby, Ricky. It's seeing them. I mean, it's just a bunch of people. I enjoy going to these school shows just to see where people are at, and also to keep an eye on them because a year passes by and I can see. I was like, do you still really want it or not? And I know I have I mean, you said they say a lot of nice things about me, so that's great. I know some people kind of like are iffy because I don't hold back, and if I don't think you're good, I'm gonna let you know, from my opinion. Or even the bigger dudes, I have specific notes for the bigger guys because those are scenarios that I've been a part of. And my first question to them is like, are you working out? Don't use like being big as an excuse to just be big. I wish I could sit here and like write a list, but if I give you a list, someone's gonna fucking message me like, why didn't you say my name, bro? So I'm just gonna put over my kids.
Yeah.
Well, Damien and Chewy.
And I love that you said my kids because that's the consensus of a lot of it. Is I hear, oh, that's one of Charles's kids. I hear that all the time. But go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And it's good that you take pride in developing people and trying to set a high standard for what the next generation of wrestlers will be like, right? And we've already given a ton of really good advice. Wrestlers that are listening to this, or even people thinking about being a wrestler, this is just a wealth of advice already. And you mentioned earlier you've been wrestling for over a decade, working even longer than that, doing stuff, helping out in wrestling. If you were trying to pick like one piece of advice amongst the many, what would be the thing that you'd be like, this is the thing that needs to be passed on to the next generation of wrestlers?
If you're thinking of starting, so like if you're like, hey, I want to become one, I got to find a school or whatever. One is research the schools you're going to. And two, which is the most important thing, is be in some kind of shape. And by that, I don't mean be muscular or do whatever, but I've had guys come in for tryouts, and before we even start, which means we do cardio before we actually start training, and there are people that couldn't walk anymore from squats. And I was like, if you cannot handle like the pre-training stuff, I can't trust you to pick people up and do whatever, or for yourself. So be in some kind of shape, because wrestling is a different beast, whether it's cardio and the strength and all that stuff. So if you're thinking of starting, do your research on where you're thinking of going and be ready for physicality. So like have your cardio up. If you're not, then there's a lot of people who have hit me up and they're like, oh, I'm thinking of starting the gym when I start school. I'm like, no, do the gym, do that for like maybe 6 months or a year. And then when you think you're ready to handle some physicality, then you can go and start at the school. It's just not going to be good. And if the school is any good, they will let you know that it's not good and they won't just let you slide. For people who are already wrestling now or like new to the game, I would say the biggest thing is learning to be honest with yourself. And I mean, like people throw around the catchphrase like take a look in the mirror and stuff like that. And I don't think people there's so many like cliche in terms that, especially in wrestling, because wrestling is super old. It's like, oh, stay humble and do this. But I don't think there are people that explain thoroughly like what that means, especially to new people. It's like stay humble, and then they don't tell them what. So like the student like, oh, I gotta stay humble, so I can't be confident, or I can't tell myself good job. I'm like, that's not what it means. But nobody sits there and explains just what you're supposed to do, how to take that.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's the honesty part is like sitting there and looking at yourself and saying, am I presentable? Are people going to pay a ticket to see me? What do I need to work on? And it's like the honesty is hard because nobody wants to like say bad things about themselves in a sense, but it's not a bad thing. It's just more like to gain this success, what steps do I need to take? And at that point, it proves your passion, because if you decide to take those steps, and it's something, it's dedication. And if you're like, this is just too hard, or I can't go to the gym more than twice a week, then obviously you don't want it. There's so many people that sit here and say, I want a contract and I want to do this, or I want to wrestle in there every weekend. And then they're crying over a 6-hour drive,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, if you're not willing to do this stuff, or, spend 8-hour days because, hey, we got to get here at 10 in the morning, set up the ring, it's hot as fuck. And now you got to wrestle, you got to take down the ring, you got to do all this. And so that's something you're not willing to do, especially early on. How bad do you want it? This is just part of the game. So it's just like, obviously trying to decipher who's taking advantage and not. But if it's something you want to do, that's like part of networking, so it's like, be honest. And I think a lot of new people, at least that I've interacted, a lot of them are kind of delusional. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the way it is. And there's no nicer way to say it. It's just, there's some delusion there. And I think the biggest thing missing is, so I think some people are worried or too nice to pull that person aside and be like, hey, you're not as good as you probably think. You could be, and you could get there, but right now you're not. Because the problem is those people get so close-minded because they think they've made it to a certain point, and now they've closed off to learning. And if their mentor, their trainer isn't telling them that they need some stuff to work on, when someone from the outside comes in and says, hey, you got to work on this, they're just going to be like, oh, this guy's just an asshole, fuck him, because no one's told me other than this person. And that's where those issues happen.
That makes sense, because one of the questions we often ask, we didn't have to ask you, but we'll often ask, like, who are some wrestlers you pull from, or what are some pop culture stuff that you pull from, and kind of something that we kind of end up kind of pulling out of people is kind of an understanding of like, are you somebody that is a student of the game? And if so, like, what are you pulling from? What is your favorite stuff that you want to be inspired by and to continue to improve yourself? So it's great that we're on the right track with our mindset and trying to figure out what kind of stuff people are looking at. And it sounds like that's incredibly important.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Most people sit here and think like, oh, I'm just work on my moves and stuff. And it's like, no, bro, don't look at wrestling matches for the moves they're doing. Look at wrestling matches for why they did the move and how they're getting to this move, and just like the psychology of it. Like, that's how I always tell people, wherever you want to go, look at the best of wherever you want to be, and that's what you have to strive to be. And if you're not near there and you're not taking the steps to do that, then you either don't want it and you're lying to yourself, and you need to fucking sit there and, like, again, be honest. And that's stuff I heard when I first started. And I had to take a moment where I had to realize, like, bro, you are not doing everything you need to do. And then the first time I did extra work for WWE, one of the refs pulled me aside and told me something. And it was like, I've heard it before, but just, I guess, hearing it in that like scenario, in that environment, it blew my mind. I was like, dude, you have to get your shit together. And it's like, but you have to have I can't just be like, oh, that ref's stupid, I'm going to do whatever I do. You have to be honest and fucking be open to that feedback.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up the psychology part of things, because, a lot of wrestlers, like you said, will look at it and be like, did I do the move good? But it's more of, why did you do it? And did it get it over with the crowd? Like, did the crowd understand why you did it? Like, because you're now in a day and age where not all wrestling fans are stupid. You know what I mean? And we go there for the show. We go there for the storytelling. That's what we want to see.
Right.
And it's one of the things I hate when I see a match and it's just a spot fest. I'm not a fan of that. I never have been. But when we get to talking about your wrestling career, the past and the future, For you, what are some of the things that keep you up at night about wrestling?
All my injuries. Honestly, now it's different. Like I said, with the whole honesty thing, there was a lot of times where I kind of put myself in this like delusional state of how far I'm going to make it or what I wanted to accomplish and all that. And I think when I took a step back and realized like what is reachable for me and what I really wanted, things became like so much easier. Now, honestly, it's more of worrying about my kids. Like,
Hmm.
are they reaching to the promotions that I told them to? Are they posting enough? Are they doing this? If they're doing a show and I'm not around, like, are they good? You know what I mean? Like, usually with Bryce, because there's such a time difference, he's driving. There's a lot of like solo driving. So, like, part of the worry now is, okay, after a show, I got to make sure he's safe, that his match is fine. And if he's driving on the road alone, I'm going to call him to like keep him up. That way he has company. So it's like shit like that. I mean, wrestling in general, I don't think I know there's people who like want to see it change a certain way or want to see it go back a certain time. And I don't think it's worth wasting time doing that because it's not going to
I
happen.
agree. I
Social
agree.
media is not going to disappear. The thing that changed wrestling the most was the thing that has nothing to do with wrestling, which was the internet and social media and stuff. So it's just like, why try to go back to the 80s if we can't, all we have to do is adapt to what the things we have now and
Yep.
make changes that way, I guess. But yeah, I mean, wrestling wise, it's just, I think a big one before was drama. All the drama in
Mhm.
wrestling, it was like, oh my God, I got to think about this. This person said that. This person's going to be, even when I used to do podcasts when I first started, like I'd be worried about what I said. I'm like, this person's going to hear this line and get pissed. And that was a lot. And now, honestly, like it's not, I don't give a shit, and I think that's
Mhm.
been helping. So now my only worry is literally just my kids and not feeling so hurt, which is
Right,
kind of
right.
part of the deal.
And that comes with time and experience, though, about not
Yeah.
worrying so much about, oh, I said this line or I said that line. I don't
Yeah,
mean
I
to
was
cut
gonna
you off.
say like that is, whether it's inside of wrestling or outside of wrestling, learning to not hold yourself back by your own insecurities is such a tough thing to kind of overcome.
Yeah.
I think one thing that happens with wrestling is like no matter how much you love wrestling, there's kind of a point where a lot of times there's a lot of negativity where you love it, but like, okay, you harp on this, you harp on that. So kind of to pull away from that a little bit, when you think about wrestling, what do you think is like the best part about it? Like what is like this is wrestling?
Oh, dude. I mean, shit. In the ring, I mean, and from just the sports entertainment aspect, being able to be something that you always wanted to be, and also being something you didn't think you could be, is like such a great feeling, right? Like
Hmm.
I grew up very introverted and kind of to myself, non-confrontational, and this and that. So I always tell people my character is kind of every like feeling I had growing up out. Like I'm gonna be a fucking asshole. I'm gonna be violent. I'm gonna be super confrontational. I'm gonna say what's on my mind. It's like everything that I wanted to do and I knew I couldn't for safety reasons is what it is. Everything that that you want to be, that like it's just that the whole like everything turned up to 10 is like such a cliche, but it's so true. It's just like I always tell people, as a heel, I'm essentially everything that I hate about myself, because those are actual feelings, those are actual human traits that I possess and I know I have or can, and I just let them out. I was like, there's always envy and hatred in there. So I'm like, I'm gonna dig deep down into all those little feelings that I've had at some point, and this is who it's gonna be. Because now these are natural feelings, and that's what makes, like, in my opinion, like a good heel. And at this point, like even now, I can be an asshole, and I think people still like it. I guess it's just who I'm an asshole to. So I'm like, I
Yeah.
just kind of do whatever I want now, and it's great. And like in that process, you kind of find who you are. So like now, when people
Hmm.
ask who's Charles Cassus, I'm like, it might be sound like a cop out, but it's me. Like it's who I am. It's who like the last 10 years has evolved into. It's who I've worked on from a human being standpoint outside of wrestling and in wrestling, molded into one. Because
Hmm.
all the work I put in on my like myself, mental health, and everything transformed like who Charles Cassis R3 is. But yeah, it's just that wrestling thing is just, I mean, you have a bunch of people just watching you do your shtick. Like you literally have the spotlight, and you get to be violent and entertain people and just be this like entity. And outside of wrestling, at least for me personally, it's given me like the best friendships I've ever had. The longest
Hmm.
friendships I've ever had have been because of wrestling. I moved around a lot as a kid and stuff, so there was no like childhood friendships I had. And the best people I've met I have been through wrestling. Best moments I've had in my life have been through wrestling, and severely outweigh the negative. Because if the negative outweighed the positive, I would have been gone a long time ago. But like the positive, just for me, outweighs it. And the more you grow, and more you realize that like the problems, anybody who doesn't like me or the problems people have with me are not my issue. It's not my thing. I don't care. I'm in my lane. It makes it so much easier because now you're not really worried about it. I just worry about myself. I worry about my people, and that's it. You know, like I don't know. I love seeing people, good people, hardworking people succeed. And yeah, I mean, like the best moments in life, best friendships of life have been, Evan's like my best friend, whether we fight or not. Like I've known that cat for like 10 years, we started training together, and it wouldn't have happened because of wrestling. I wouldn't have met Bryce if it wasn't for wrestling. I wouldn't have met Steve and learned valuable things in and out of the ring, just in life in general, if it wasn't for wrestling. I would have never experienced being backstage or seeing how the WWE works if it wasn't for wrestling. I would have never, come out to a theme song or do the shit that I do now if it wasn't for wrestling. Like wrestling has given me pretty much everything that I am happy to have right now.
And I love the fact that you said Charles Cassus is me, because I'm a true believer that to be at the level that you are, Cassus, which for those who don't know, he's the IZW world champion, also the Wrestle Drag world champion. You have to be a method actor to where you live your persona, and you have the time and the work put in that you truly know who you are.
Yeah.
And that's a level that I feel a lot of people don't reach, unfortunately, in their careers. And I would like to see it more, but the confidence every time I've seen you has really exuberated, right? Especially like I saw the match. I was lucky enough to get to see the match between you and Ocean Avery, and it was a phenomenal match, and the crowd was hot, super loud. But as far as that goes,
you've given us a lot today, honestly, and like just hearing your passion about wrestling and how much you care about not only what you've done, but also like what you're able to pass on to the next generation is beyond admirable. The one thing though is that wrestling fans they're hard to win over sometimes, right? You could tell them that you walk on water and they'll be like, yeah, okay, give me more. So, for those holdout fans that need a little bit more of like a motivation to come either watch you wrestle or watch your kids wrestle, what's your pitch to these holdout fans as to why they should come out for you?
You're stupid if you don't. No, I mean honestly, like I'm not gonna give you the shtick of like, because I've heard it from some people of like you're gonna see something you haven't seen before, and that's bullshit. Like there's so many talented human beings. For me, and just kind of like segueing from what we just talked about, for me, it's like you're gonna get like genuine 100% like realness. Like this is who this dude is. I love to get physical. I am not. I want to say I'm probably not your ordinary big guy. I think I have my surprises, but I know what I can do in there. And I mean, you're gonna get a show. And my goal is to not be like the rest of the card. I am very aware of my surroundings and the environment I'm in, and I feel I've gotten pretty fucking good at adapting to it. So you're gonna see something different. I'm gonna give you a variety show, whether it's from a big show or just in my little bubble. And if you've been lucky enough to see it in my kids, that just shows an example of that. But you're just gonna get our 3. You're not gonna get another me on the same show that you go to. I'll tell you that much, because there's probably another me somewhere in the country or in the world. But as far as like if you go to a show, I guarantee you won't see a duplicate of who I am.
Hell yeah, I love that. I love that, you're always trying to do a little bit extra. There's like that little extra polish on every little thing. Like, well, I know I'm aware, but also like I'm going to try to still subvert that and take it to another level. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, bro, I'm pretty fucking good.
I mean, that's facts. And I mentioned it earlier. Other people have brought your name up, and it's not just other people. It's other world champions from other promotions that are like, hey, you need to talk to Charles. You need to pick his brain. And I think that says a lot.
I'm grateful for that, Matt. That's awesome to hear.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap up the show today. For all of you, you guys can follow Charles on Instagram at R3Cassus. Make sure you also follow us. You can check him out on Wrestle Drag. You can check him out at IZW and many more promotions. Just make sure you follow him so you know where he's going. And Charles, I'm going to go ahead and take the time, man, and say thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for having me. This was a blast.
Absolutely, man. And guys, as always, you never know who will be right across the ring.